Hi everyone. Here a little bit early just to make sure that you can hear me because I've occasionally had problems with that. So if you're here, just say hello. I'm probably gonna just see if anyone can hear me, and then I might go away for a second. I will definitely be back at the top of the hour, but I just wanted to see, is anyone there? Hello? Hello, Isabella. Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, awesome. All right, so we have about 4 more minutes. I just wanted to kind of get in here and check. We're going to be talking about illusions. So up at the top, you see there is a link to the poem. If you want to start taking a look at that and possibly even print it out. And then I've just kind of like talked about how illusions are still very important in our day. Actually, maybe very important, especially to the genre of hip hop. Seems to be one of the main literary devices used in that genre. So, if you want to think about that, have you ever, picked up on an illusion? I think it always makes me feel smart when I've picked up on something. Makes me feel like I'm a part of kind of the in group or something. So, it doesn't necessarily need to be traditional poetry. Have you ever picked up on an illusion, that kind of made you feel good about yourself? Okay. I'm gonna go away for about 2 minutes. I'll be right back, and then we'll start. Okay. Hello, everyone. All right, let's see. We got about 2 more minutes. Yep. If you do have time, check out some of these links. We are going to be discussing illusion here. And actually, I'm going to turn on my infinity screen, see if it works. All right. Well, it doesn't seem like many people are biting on the, have you ever picked up on an illusion? If you want to answer that, you can. Maybe you could also tell me, what are you guys studying at this point? Are you still on? I know that a number of you guys were still reading Things Fall Apart, I believe, last I heard from some of the people in this group. Okay. Well, I think we're going to get going now. And we're going to be talking about illusion. And illusion is another need to know term. Still doing Things Fall Apart. Good. Okay, I think that actually it's really relevant to the topic of this poem, as kind of coming from very different cultures. But I think just this question of kind of an ancient idea of heroism, which I think Okonkwo definitely holds to. But is that possible, in modern times and, colonial, post-colonial times? Can we still attain to that kind of heroism, that notion of heroism? Um, you know, maybe not. Maybe that's good in a certain way, but in another way, maybe, we've lost something in our modern era. And I think that's one of the things that this poem dwells on. Hello, hello. Okay, so we're getting a lot of people showing up. Very cool. I'm going to get going now since it is 8:01, and respect your guys' time, and we'll just kind of allow people to kind of join us as we go. Today we are doing allusion. We've gone through a lot of different, poetic elements is really what we're looking for. Need to know terms for the poetry prompt. Also, we can use them on the multiple choice. Hopefully, you guys are having a good week, and we're going to get a new term, allusion. I think that it's a very useful one, both for the multiple choice and for the poetry prompt. So first of all, just a reminder that we do, first of all, have multiple choice, and it is 1 hour, 55 multiple choice questions, 1/2 prose, 1/2 poetry, 1/2 older, 1/2 modern. And then you have a 10-minute break and you come back in for the free response questions. And our first one is the poetry prompt. Okay. And so that's what we've been working on over the last couple weeks, and hopefully you found it useful. Prose prompt, we're going to get into that as time goes on. Question number 3, open prompt, which we have talked about and we'll come back to. But whenever you're reading your novels, you really should be paying attention to the open prompt. And the open prompt is just saying, how does this or that, whatever it is, different elements contribute to meaning, kind of this larger thematic meaning. And so whenever you're reading novels or plays, make sure you're kind of thinking about the open prompt and the wording of that. But right now we're focusing on the poetry prompt. And we're going to do Icarus by Edward Field. He wrote this poem 1950. And I think that's kind of interesting. I don't know if you guys are going to read Death of a Salesman, but around the same time. And I think there was a lot of, excitement about the American dream and, lots of possibilities and a lot of prosperity coming around after World War II. But I think there were a lot of people, and especially writers, who saw through that, who saw that might cause more harm than good, believing in that kind of dream. And I think this poem actually pairs quite well with Death of a Salesman, which we read in our class. Just this kind of question about, is heroism, kind of in the ancient sense. And maybe you've read Sophocles, Oedipus the King, Antigone, Medea, Beowulf, maybe, where we have that kind of traditional idea of heroism, classical or mythic version of heroism. And is that even possible in our day and age? And I think that's one of the things that Willie in Death of a Salesman sets out to find out. And I think we see a similar kind of thing dramatized in Icarus by Edward Field. And actually, they were written around the same time. So, okay. So first of all, we are using our How to Read a Poem process. And I kind of want to go through that pretty much every week. I think it's a good way when you don't know where to start with a poem. I think it's great to, first of all, look at what do you enjoy, what do you not enjoy about it. So heart and an X, and just a brief explanation as to what is it that you're picking up on there. And a lot of times that ends up being something significant to the poem. Meaning, we talked about lots of different types of meaning. First of all, looking things up, while you're not taking the exam, you might as well use dictionary.com or the dictionary, look up words and figure out what phrases mean, be able to paraphrase those or take a best guess. Also, though, figurative language. Okay, so what is the meaning of this figurative language? What is the meaning of this simile or this metaphor or synecdoche or metonymy or apostrophe? How does that contribute to meaning? Those are figurative meanings, but they are meanings as well. And then today, allusion. So allusion also kind of hints at some meanings. It opens up this kind of field of meaning that's associated with, something that happened in history or a previous literary text. Structure and language, always want to keep an eye on that. Structure is anything related to the form of the poem, the shape of the poem, kind of structural aspects, things that you could notice even if you were reading it in a different language because it's just the way it looks on the page structurally. Language has to do with the levels of language. Are we speaking colloquially or using slang? Or are we speaking in a very exalted language? Are we using foreign language? And what are the reasons behind some of those choices that poets make? Mood and tone. Remember, mood is the emotion of the poem. Are you picking up on some emotion that's coming through? Happiness, sadness, anger. Tone is the way that that's expressed. So you can express anger in kind of a hot way, passionate way. You can also express it in kind of a cold way. But kind of the difficulty is that we need to read between the lines and see whether or not we have any evidence of that tone. Okay. And then finally, I recommend that you do a body paragraph at least. Certainly, every now and again, do a full-fledged timed writing. But I think it makes sense to do a body paragraph, really zeroing in on one of those elements that you noticed in the how to read a poem process. So I'm going to switch over really quick just to make sure everything's going okay in the chat. If you guys have any questions or any concerns, why don't you let me know at this point. I'm going to go back over here. We read The Crucible by Arthur Miller. Okay. Yep. And in terms of hero, we read Macbeth and Othello, Things Fall Apart. Yeah. So, I think all of those characters, even though they, they suffer kind of tragic demise, they do attain to a kind of heroism. They have a certain nobility and status that I think they can attain to. And I think one of the questions that we have in modern times is that still possible? I think certain things is probably good, just glad to get past that because there is, I think, some toxic masculinity that is part of all of that. But at the same time, I think a lot of people are feeling this sense of being unfulfilled and not having that opportunity to really, strike a blow against, this enemy of man's freedom, as Arthur Miller once said. Do we have an opportunity to do that in modern times? And I think even tragic heroes, ones who die or suffer some sort of ignominious demise, they still attain to a kind of heroism that we may not really have access to anymore, just because of kind of the shallowness and superficiality of modern times. Okay, so it looks like everything's okay. I'm going to flip back over and just continue here, talking about allusion. And an allusion is a reference to something in history or previous literature. And I mentioned that it's very popular, I think, in modern day hip hop. I said that I think a lot of times we get a big kick out of going to Rap Genius and finding out what all the references are to, also finding out what the background track is. It's a little less common in our day and age, but certainly old school rap would use backing tracks. And that was a whole interesting, finding out what that was. Is it significant to the text? Is there some meaning that's being expressed here? And I think a lot of times it's fun to go on this sort of scavenger hunt as to what are those references. And it's funny that hip hop artists really have no problem using them, and they're not super concerned whether or not you get them. So there are some interesting choices I think you can make as a poet there, in terms of are you using your allusions to kind of like set up an in-group and an out-group to kind of make, point out some messages that not everyone will necessarily pick up on? Or, are you trying to reference to a text that may help convey some sort of meaning? But it is a mean of suggesting far more than what it says, and poets are always happy about that when they can say something in the shortest amount of time possible. So their strength and economy, saying so much with so little. When you make a small allusion, you open up this whole world of another text or something that's happened in history. And poets love that, when they can open up a whole world just with a minimum of words. And so that's one of the reasons why they really love allusion. Because it's so compact, it can be extremely useful to a poet, and a poet, again, doesn't have 600 pages to make their point. They really are trying to say what they want to say, just very briefly, concisely, and pack a lot of punch. So we should know that writers often presume a certain familiarity with the Bible. Okay, so one of the foundational texts of Western civilization, Bible, and make lots of references to the Bible. And that's everything from your classical writers all the way up to Kendrick Lamar. I mean, he makes tons of references to the Bible, and certain your writer is pretty much going to assume, even in our more secular day and age, a certain amount of familiarity with the stories in the Bible. Classical myth is another big one. Okay, so any kind of reading that you can do in Greek and Roman mythology, and I don't think you need to read whole books about this, but certainly whenever you get an allusion, I think it makes sense to look it up and see who some of those people are. Finally, kind of a latecomer to the game, but definitely one that plays a big role in allusion is Shakespeare. And we have lots of references to Shakespeare, lots of allusions to Shakespeare. So writers kind of presume that you are fairly well read. If you're a student, you may not have read all of these texts, but I think one of the parts of this process of getting better at analyzing literature is whenever you see something that's unfamiliar, learn about it. Add it to your repertoire of allusions, and you'll get a lot more enjoyment out of it when you see that again. A lot of these really are kind of popular references, and you'll see them in multiple texts. They vary widely in the burden that is placed upon them to convey meaning. So sometimes a person will say, you need to understand this in order to get the point. In order to really understand this text, I'm going to put a lot of burden on this allusion. And if you miss it, you really are going to miss the point of this poem. Now, there are other ones, and we've talked about this with regard to symbol, where, if you don't get it, it's okay. It'll certainly increase your enjoyment if you do get it. If you don't get it, we're not going to put that much of a burden on it. So I've experienced this a little bit. I used to listen and go to Chicago a lot. We're in Michigan, and listen to jazz. And one of the things the jazz musicians do is a lot of times they will quote other jazz artists, or they'll quote other musicians, and that's allusions. And they're making little jokes. And every now and again, you'll hear people at another table like laughing about a phrase that was used in a solo. And what they're picking up on is an allusion. Now, if I didn't pick up on that, I can still enjoy the solo. But that person over at that other table who picked up on that was a quote from Miles Davis or something like that. They pick up on there's a joke that's being made. And, so I think there is a possibility of having more enjoyment the more of these allusions that you can pick up on. So there is kind of a popular, famous one. Lord Chesterfield had this, and it was kind of spur of the moment, his just quick-wittedness. There was a dinner thrown by the Spanish ambassador. The Spanish ambassador toasted the King of Spain, likening him to the sun. The French ambassador toasted the King of France, likening him to the moon. And so Lord Chesterfield asked to say something about his sovereign, and he said the following: "Your excellencies have taken from me all the greatest luminaries of heaven. I therefore beg leave to give your excellencies Joshua. Okay, what? So you may not have picked up on that at all. He's staking a lot on this. This is a very heavy burden. He is making reference to Joshua in the Bible actually caused the sun and the moon to stop, and he commanded the sun and the moon so that they would stay in their place so that he could kind of slaughter the rest of his enemies, basically. But that was a pretty, if you didn't get that, you wouldn't have gotten the joke at all. That's a pretty good example of an illusion that really stakes a lot on understanding it. So I do want to point out some of the other illusions that we've seen. We did read the whipping a couple weeks back, and this was a light one. This didn't have a lot of burden on it, but the woman leans muttering against a tree, exhausted, purged. And I suggested to you back then that I felt like there was a light allusion to the story of Eve. Now, did you need to see that? Was there a lot staked on that illusion? I don't think so. I think a lot of people are just fine to let that slide and not even notice it. But I think if you do and you want to use some more tentative language, suggests or implies, I do think you can make a case that that played a role in contributing to meaning. We had the speech from Henry VIII. And this was a more obvious one, when he falls, talking about this kind of man who has, set his ambitions high. When he falls like Lucifer. And that's a pretty obvious allusion to Lucifer. I think a lot of people know that Lucifer was the most beautiful angel, but he aspired to be like God. And as a result, he was cast out of heaven. And so there's a message here about pride, and opening up that whole story really helps us to understand that and really dramatizes that. Okay, just a reminder about the poetry prompt in a nutshell. Poetic techniques convey meaning. That is what we're looking for. So if we're going to talk about illusions, we really do want to show how they convey whatever the meaning is. What is the message of this poem? So there are a lot of different ways that we see this expressed. We'll take a look at what it is in this particular poem. But that's the basic formula that we'll see in all of these poems. Okay, we're going to look at Icarus. And here is this prompt. I'll copy and paste this and put this in the stream for you. But this is my annotations in body paragraph. I did it a little bit differently this time. Did it electronically, and we'll see if that works out for you. Okay. Oh, yeah. Out. Yeah, and I don't think that they really stake a lot on that, do they? You don't really need to know that to appreciate that poem. Okay, here is the link if you want to go there. Let me go through some of the comments that you guys made. Okay, so Eminem, Eminem makes tons of allusions. All that we read are really tragic heroes. In Things Fall Apart, there are many allusions to the Igbo culture. Yep. Left strokes. In terms of allusions, we were just talking about the use of allusions in college application essays. Yeah, we were kind of doing that as well. Allusions to famous stories and movies. Would songs that mention Romeo and Juliet count as allusion? Yeah, I definitely think so. Naya did a great job using an allusion to Alice in Wonderland in her college application essay. Cool. Allusions, Romeo and Juliet run rampant in popular culture. Out title alludes to Shakespeare's Macbeth. Yeah, out. Brief candle, so there's also out damn spot, but I think that's the out brief candle. And we see that young boy in Robert Frost's poem. His life is snuffed out too early, too soon. Okay, allusion refers to another work of literature or art outside the text. Yeah, it's tricky. When is it just kind of information about a culture, and when is it a specific reference where we're actually kind of going back into our, kind of our library, our memories of texts and historical events that have occurred, and being able to make those connections. Okay, let's head over to the poem, and I just want to read this first of all, and then I'll go through my analysis of it. So let's look at the prompt first of all. This was 2009 B, which they don't always do anymore. I'm not sure why not, but this was usually at the international schools, so they wouldn't have this exact same prompt as the United States had. And so 2009 B, the poem is Icarus. And the prompt is: the following poem, written by Edward Field, makes use of the Greek myth of Daedalus and Icarus. And by the way, they don't make you know all of these things. Here it is. They give you all the information about that down there. We'll read that in a second. Read the poem carefully, then write an essay in which you analyze how Field employs literary devices in adapting the Icarus myth to a contemporary setting. So first of all, notice that just has a literary devices. So we just have to keep an eye out for literary devices. They don't suggest any, but that is that mention of the poetic elements. They called it literary devices this time. This is kind of a weird meaning that they want us to look at. So this is the meaning. Conveys adapting the Icarus myth to a contemporary setting. So what is its message? What is it going for in taking this Icarus myth and placing it in a contemporary setting? Is there a message or meaning there? I think you can read between the lines and still see that they want us to talk about the meaning. What is the meaning of that? And what's the point of doing what Edward Field does in this poem, which I love. So here's the poem, and you guys can maybe chime in on anything that you like or don't like about this poem. That's our first step. So Icarus by Edward Field. Oh, and by the way, let's switch. You guys know the myth here. Daedalus and his son Icarus fashioned wings of feather and wax in an attempt to escape from prison on the island of King Minos by flying across the sea. Okay, before their flight, Daedalus warned his son not to fly too close to the sun. But caught up in the experience of flying, Icarus ignored the warning and soared upward. The heat of the sun melted the wax, and the wings fell off, and he plunged to his death in the sea. Okay, so this is a popular myth, and it's, something about moderation. I think there is sort of a moral of the story there, but Icarus does attain to a kind of heroism there just because he has these aspirations that are just, outsized aspirations, and certainly would qualify him to be a hero in that ancient or mythic sense. Okay, so we're going to adapt it to the contemporary setting, though. So Icarus by Edward Field. Only the feathers floating around the hat showed that anything more spectacular had occurred than the usual drowning. The police preferred to ignore the confusing aspects of the case, and the witnesses ran off to a gang war. So the report, filed and forgotten in the archives, read simply drowned. But it was wrong. Icarus had swum away, coming at last to the city where he rented a house and tended the garden. That nice Mr. Hicks, the neighbors called him, never dreaming that the gray, respectable suit concealed arms that had controlled huge wings, nor that those sad, defeated eyes had once compelled the sun. And had he told them, they would have answered with a shocked, uncomprehending stare. No, he could not disturb their neat front yards. Yet all his books insisted that this was a horrible mistake. What was he doing aging in a suburb? Can the genius of the hero fall to the middling stature of the merely talented? And nightly, Icarus probes his wound, and daily in his workshop, curtains carefully drawn, constructs small wings and tries to fly to the lighting fixture on the ceiling. Fails every time and hates himself for trying. He had thought himself a hero, had acted heroically, and dreamt of his fall, the tragic fall of the hero, but now rides commuter trains, serves on various committees, and wishes he had drowned. Okay, take that in. Let's just see what you like about that poem. Anything that you like? Let's see, anything that's come in here. What do you like or not like about that poem? Anyone want to chime in? Like the enjambment. Good, Bruno. Yeah, there's definitely some enjambment used there. There's also the opposite end stop. That's definitely very interesting to look at. Varied punctuation. Is there a shift in tone? I think so. I definitely think that there's a shift in tone. Maybe even multiple shifts in tone. Um, do you guys get the gist of what it's about? Am I understanding it correctly? So Icarus didn't die. He actually kind of swam away and went to this ordinary life. And it's a lot like the Incredibles. I don't know if you guys saw the original Incredibles where, I was a hero in a past life, but now I'm working in a cubicle. And it's like just this situational irony that a great hero, just has to go through this normal life. And I think it's a universal question about modern life. He doesn't believe he belongs in the suburbs. Exactly, Tamara. Yeah. So, it's just this ridiculous situation, this absurd situation of someone who should have been heroic in that tragic or mythic sense, who is thrown into modern times where there is no opportunity for that. There's no way to be a hero. I think according to this poem and according to some other works written around this time. Okay, so I'm going to flip back and I want to switch over to the model response, and I'm going to actually do this a little bit differently. You'll notice that I have my annotations off here to the side. I'm just going to share some of the things that I wrote, and then we'll just talk about this poem a little bit. First of all, I love just this opening lines, only the feathers floating around the hat showed that anything more spectacular had occurred than the usual drowning. I mean, it's just takes anything that would be tragic or, pathetic about this and just makes it like commonplace, everyday, mundane. I love the irreverence of it and placing, a hero who's usually talked about in the exalted tones in this rather mundane situation. In terms of my dislike, let's see if I can find it. Where is it? It's all the way down here. Okay. This section, and you may have noticed it actually, I got a little bit tripped up here. This is an area where so awkwardly and inconsistently constructed, it's difficult to read. So he had thought himself a hero, had acted heroically, and dreamt of his fall, the tragic fall of the hero. And it's just so awkward. And I don't like that. But on the other hand, I kind of understand that it works. It actually may be appropriate to what we're talking about in this poem. But we'll save that a little bit till later. Moving on to some of the meaning things, I did look something up, can the genius of the hero, and I didn't think this is genius like having a high IQ. This is genius, a peculiar, distinctive, or identifying character or spirit of the hero. Okay, so the hero has a certain quality about them. And is it possible for that to fall to the middling stature, the merely talented, the mediocre? So I did want to look that up since I had that opportunity. Moving on, let's see where my other asterisk is. I did think I saw another allusion, by the way. Tend the garden. This is actually the last line of Voltaire's Candide, and I'm not going to tell you the whole story there, but it did open that up for me. It was kind of this big allusion. It is the last line of Candide where I think the suggestion is Candide realizes that we should just tend the garden. We should have these more modest aspirations rather than the grand epic aspirations, which are not possible or desirable. I did think that it was a reference to that, whether or not you picked up on it. I didn't think a lot was staked on it, so that's okay. I want to talk about some of the structural things that I noticed about this. First of all, there is alliteration. I call alliteration a structural thing because it's repetition. And so there's feathers floating. There's police preferred. There's confusing aspects of the case. And what I noticed about this, and again, this is not required, but I almost saw an allusion to ancient poetry. Alliteration was a characteristic of oral poetry, before poetry was written down. And if you read Beowulf, it's actually kind of the central literary device that's used, and it's used in a lot of other ancient poetries. And so in some ways, it was kind of subtly hearkening back to ancient poetry, alluding to that tradition, even though a lot of what's being discussed at that point is very mundane. Let's go to my other structural thing. There are these long lines here that contain, are reminiscent of heroic verse. Even if you didn't pick up on heroic verse, which was dactylic hexameter, it's the meter that the Odyssey is written in, the Iliad is written in. Epic kind of feel, 18-syllable lines. Now, whether or not you picked up on that, these are longer lines, and a longer line gives a hero space to be heroic. I think that's part of the reason why Homer chose it. But at any rate, we have these long, heroic, commodious lines. And when you look at what's being expressed there, concealed arms that had controlled huge wings, and defeated eyes that had once compelled the sun. There are some pretty heroic things that are expressed in these long, commodious lines. And so I thought that was significant. Now, these shorter lines at the end, but now rides on commuter trains, serves on various committees, wishes he had drowned, are the exact opposite of the longer, heroic-sounding lines. Appropriately, they describe mundane modern life where Icarus is constrained, unable to attain to ancient notions of heroism. Okay, so sort of longer, shorter, reading into that a little bit. But, it's a structural observation, and I think I can make kind of a connection to meaning there. Moving on to language is our next reading. And let's see. These lines, actually going back to the same lines, contain larger, more exalted sounding words such as controlled, defeated, compelled. This points to Icarus's heroic aspirations in his former mythic setting. Kind of opposite that is these more modern words like suburbs, lighting fixture, commuter trains, etc., more pedestrian and modern, create a tension that dramatizes the irony of Icarus's situation. So it's kind of a combination of this heroic stuff, big, kind of larger than life, epic, heroic, with these piddly things that we deal with in modern life. And it's just situationally ironic to put these together, to juxtapose them, as we said last week. Okay, last couple of things. I did have a couple tones. I forgot who asked about tone, but I did feel, let's see if I can find this, bring it up. I felt like this was a very objective and matter-of-fact way of writing here. There was passive voice. The report was filed and forgotten. We don't even have a subject. We're just saying filed and forgotten by whoever. And that is kind of almost the tone that you use in a report. You really feel that in that first stanza. Moving on, I do think that in this section there is kind of a heroic, and we might even put in question, in parentheses, mock heroic tone that is being used there. But it definitely has a different feel from that report writing kind of tone that is used earlier. Okay, I think that's it. I'm just going to go through what I wrote for this, and then I'll let you guys ask whatever questions. Sorry, my voice is not holding up too well. So my thesis is Field uses literary devices such as language, imagery, and structural elements to adapt the Icarus myth to modern setting. And my topic sentence for, I'm just going to do one of these. I'm going to do language. Firstly, Field uses shifts in language in his adaptation of the Icarus myth to suggest that heroism is not possible in the modern age. My first detail. Throughout this poem, Field employs a more exalted language that corresponds to Icarus's former heroism. For instance, Icarus is described as having arms that controlled huge wings and sad, defeated eyes that had once compelled the sun. These words hint at the heightened language reserved for tales of ancient heroes. These exalted expressions, however, are hemmed in and overwhelmed by the mundane expressions of modern life. For example, the first stanza of the poem reads with the deliberate impersonality and passive voice of a report. Only the feathers floating around the hat, and so on and so forth. Last detail, frequent mention of the miscellanea of modern life adds to the tension. Mundane neologisms, or made up kind of new words like suburbs, light fixture, commuter trains, and various committees are words that would never appear in a story about a hero, further dramatizing just how out of reach the heroism Icarus desires is in this modern milieu. In a wrap sentence, in sum, the juxtaposition of exalted and commonplace language situates the tragically heroic Icarus in the pedestrian present, where heroism is impossible. Okay, so that's what I got. Talking about how that allusion was adapted to the modern setting. You guys have any questions or any thoughts? Let's see what you guys wrote about here. All right. I like how he starts the sentences in 21-22 with the word and. Yeah, I definitely, let's go back to that really quick. 22 and 20, 21-22. Yeah. Okay. So they're almost kind of a desperation there. That's called polysyndeton. Let's get that in there if you want to use a fancy word. I think we mentioned it in past week. But overuse of conjunctions, and a lot of times it creates kind of a desperate or searching or almost breathless kind of experience. Okay, Selena, yes. How many teenagers and young adults plan to live extraordinary lives and then end up living these ordinary, routine, mundane lives? Yeah, perhaps don't live up to the dreamed. Yeah. I like how the poem is written more like a story because it made it easier to understand. Really like how there's a clear contrast between the heroic lines in the past and the final sad reality of his life now. Like how there's a mixture of history with words like gang wars and police, which we relate to more recent time periods. Yep. And by the way, another kind of thing almost alluded to there is like real wars, like heroic wars, like the Iliad. We're not having those kinds of wars anymore. And so gang wars is definitely a very diminished form of that. Yep, good use of the word juxtaposition there, Kat. One observation that I made was the use of irony. I like how Field uses irony to show that Icarus was never actually a hero, but he refused to accept that. Like the use of personification to create the dull, weary tone. Defeated eyes, I like that. Yeah, that is personification. You're right. So sort of personifying the eyes. Last two lines, wishes he had drowned. Okay. So it's kind of a short one here, but I think you could kind of see some of the power of allusion there, some of the reasons why poets find allusion useful. I'll just stick around a little bit here. Do you guys have any questions? Go ahead and post those. Just want to remind you, I don't know what the current status is, but I do know that we're getting to the end of October now. Just make sure to sign up. There is the replays and future live sessions. We are going to start talking about the prose prompt very soon. And, there's a lot of overlap with the poetry prompt. And then we'll keep talking about the open prompt as well, talking about what's going on in your novels and works of literature. So notice down here this little button, replays future live sessions. That is where we are going to be. Okay. Any questions? Do you have a favorite hip hop artist? I'm probably behind the times with you guys. Let's see. That's a really, really good question. Gosh, Bruno, why'd you have to ask me that? I do like Jay-Z a lot, honestly. I like how he doesn't have a different voice for rapping. I mean, he'll be doing an interview and then he'll just stand up and start rapping. Like a lot of artists affect kind of a different voice when they start rapping. And it's just so natural the way that he transitions out of that. Nas, yes, absolutely. What's your favorite hip hop artist? Nas? I like Common too a lot. You love Eminem. Okay. Michigan poet. Yeah. I definitely love Eminem. What do you think of his most recent album? You like it? Yeah. I liked it. I felt like some of those super, super fast parts. What was this? What was kind of the main track on that? Maybe some of the super, super fast parts seemed the Ringer. Yeah, I think it was the Ringer. Super, super produced. Like they had just cleaned it up to a point where it didn't really sound um natural anymore. And I don't know if that's the case or if they just wanted it to sound that way, but it was pretty amazing. I mean, it was like ridiculous. I do like Common. I tend to like people who have a little bit more of a social message. Wanted to get as many disses as possible. Yeah. Yeah. NWA. Okay, going all the way back. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's like when I was your guys' age, 89, 88, 89 is a really good time in rap music. Public Enemy was my favorite when I was a kid. I don't know if you guys listen to Public Enemy. Tupac, yep. Actually, people used to call me Machiavelli because my name sounds a little bit like it. Yeah, definitely like Tupac. Tortured. I like that when I think Kendrick Lamar for that same reason, just like obviously experiencing that internal conflict. I really love that. All right. Well, we could probably talk rap and hip hop all night long. And maybe we should do that at some point. But I think since my voice is giving out, I'm going to say good night and hopefully you guys have a wonderful week. Let me know if you have any questions. This should be available for you shortly. Talk to you soon.